Good morning, everybody. This is Team C, and we are here to deliver a presentation on week 10, and our topic is open economy theories. Let's take a look at the overview. First, we will give you a brief of the chapter summary. Then, we'll move on to problems and applications, question 2 and 8. And finally, reference.
So, what is open economy? An open economy is one that interacts freely with other economies around the world, which means it is an economy that could trade goods and services with other countries without rules and limits. The market of loanable funds describes how that borrowing happens. Both of the supply and demand of the loanable funds are related on the real interest rates. When the real interest rates increase, the people's of ideas of saving will also increase. Thus, the supply of loanable funds will be increased. As the demand of loanable funds is the behavior of the people who borrow, and the quantity of loans demanded, low real interest rates means it is cheaper to borrow. As the equilibrium interest rates, the amount of people wants to save should be exactly the same as the desired quantities of domestic investment and net foreign investment, which means the quantity of supply and quantity of demand should be equal.
So let's talk about the market for loanable funds. The supply of loanable funds comes from national savings. The demand for loanable funds comes from the domestic investment, which is I in this case, and the net capital outflow, which is NCO. We need to know the equation of S equals to I plus NCO. So, the demand and supply for the loanable funds depends on the real interest rate. People will always want to earn more money. Therefore, when the real interest rate increases, the people's will to save money will increase because it encourages people to save, and also it will raise the quantity of loanable funds supplied. And at the same time, the demand for the loanable funds will decrease, as you can see. Now let's talk about the market for foreign currency exchange. So the two sides of the foreign currency exchange market can be represented by NCO and NX. So the NCO, which is the net capital outflow, it represents the imbalance between the purchase and sales of the capital assets, while the NX, which is net exports, it means the imbalance between the exports and imports of goods and services. So in another way, net capital outflow can be used as an equation which equals to capital outflow minus capital inflow. Okay, it means the amount that you buy from the foreign assets minus the domestic assets that you sell. For NX is equals to X minus M, which means the selling of domestic goods minus the foreign goods that you bought. In a foreign currency exchange market, we will use our own currency to trade for foreign currencies. As I mentioned before, the NCO should equal to NX. And the price that balances the supply and demand for foreign currency, we call it the real exchange rate. In the following two slides, we will use three graphs to describe the effects of a government budget deficit. First of all, let me explain government budget deficits. So in an open economy, government budget deficits will reduce the supply of loanable funds, which means R will increase, NCO will decrease, and so does NX. Also, it will drive up the interest rate, crowd out domestic investment, and causes net foreign investment to fall. Now, let's look at the graph. When the government runs a budget deficit, it reduces the supply of loanable funds from S1 to S2 in the first graph. And then the interest rate will rise from R1 to R2 in order to balance the supply and demand for the loanable funds. After that, the same result will move on to the second graph, as you can see on the right. The higher interest rate will reduce the net capital outflow, and then to reduce the net capital outflow in return will reduce the supply of local currency in the market for foreign currency exchanged from S1 to S2 in the next graph, which we will talk about in the next page. In the third graph, you will see this fall in the supply of local currency will cause the real exchange rate to appreciate from E1 to E2. The appreciation of the exchange rate pushes this trade balance toward deficits. From the graph, as you can see, it causes the real exchange rate to appreciate from E1 to E2 from the graph, and then NCO1 will move to NCO2, and so does NX1 will move to NX2. Now let's move on to another important point in this chapter, which is trade policy. In a normal economy, trade policy acts as an important role because it is used by the government that these policies will directly influence the quantity of goods and services that a country imports or exports. There is also something called tariffs, which is a tax used on important goods. And also there is something called important quota, which is a limit on the quantity of a good produced abroad, which will be sold domestically. These policies will have larger impact on the microeconomic other than the macroeconomic markets, which will reduces the X and increases the M. So what is the effect on imported quota? As you can see, because the foreigners will need ringgit to buy Malaysian net exports, there is an increased demand for ringgit in the market for foreign currencies, which will lead to an appreciation of the real exchange rate. As you can see, the M will decreases and the NX will increase, and the demand for the domestic currency will increase, which will increase the real exchange rate. Thus will decreases the X, then it will increases the M, and at the end there will leave no change in the NX. I will repeat it again, there is no change in the interest rate because nothing happens in the loanable funds market, and there will be no exchange in the net exports, therefore leaving no change in the net foreign investment, even though an imported quota reduced the imports.
Next, I would like to talk about the problem and application to the government introduced an investment tax credit which subsidizes domestic investment. How does this policy affect national saving, domestic investment, net capital outflow, the interest rate, the exchange rate, and the trade balance? First, I would like to talk about what is investment tax credit. The government requires taxpayer invested the depreciable assets. A certain percentage of the tax or new investment requirement can be deducted from the income tax for that year to reduce tax burden and stimulate investment. For example, in the case of investment tax credits, companies in certain industry encouraged to invest can deduct a certain percentage of their taxable expense from the purchase of fixed assets or research and development capital stock or employment addition. From international practice, policy tools that provide tax credits for special activities that is direct subsidized are more effective than reducing the tax rate.
To the second part, the problem and application. Question 8. Suppose that your countrymen decide to increase their saving. If the elastic of net capital outflow with respect to the real interest rate is very high, will this increase in private saving have a large or small effect on domestic investment? B. If the elastic of exports with respect to the real exchange rate is very low, will this increase in private saving have a large or small effect on your real exchange rate? What is net capital outflow? Saving equals to domestic investment plus net capital outflow. Net capital outflow show the flow of funds users to be an investment to oversee by a country. For example, a Chinese resident buys the stock from US, it will rises China net capital outflow because the resident buy the foreign stock, it will cause an rising by their original country. Also, non-double funds market linked with the foreign currency exchange market because of net capital outflow. Moreover, net capital outflow show the economics in interaction with each country. Suppose our countrymen decide to increase their saving. If the elastic of net capital outflow with respect to the real interest rate is very high, private saving increase will affect a large increase in the net capital outflow because the loanable funds will be increased from the private saving from the countrymen. It affects a less increase to the domestic investment. Let's talk about the exports and real exchange rate. Net exports are known as balance of trade. Net exports are dropping as imports are increasing because the goods of imports is cheaper than the domestic goods. The condition of trade defectors is when the net export are negative. The trade surplus is when net exports are positive. So move to the real exchange rate. The real exchange rate compares international marketplace of domestic goods and foreign productions. So move to the question answered B. Because of countrymen wants to increase their private saving, the loanable funds will be increased. It causes the real interest rate decrease and the real exchange rate will decrease at the same time. The price compared with other countries will be decreased. So, more foreign residents may want to buy our country's goods and services. So it will make the trade imbalanced. The situation will until the net exports balance to net capital outflow to make a trade balance.